intro, again, I'm Dan Englander. Name of this presentation, Relationship Sales at Scale, how to reliably grow your agency or B2B service company by prospecting where you have an unfair advantage. For a little bit about me, again, yeah, like Christian said, running Sales Schema since 2014, worked with pretty much exclusively agencies and a number of other B2B service companies. For a little context, this is, a lot of our experience, most of our experience is focused on selling bigger ticket offers, longer sales processes, consultative sales processes. In addition, we also run training programs on this. And I'm an author of that book behind me, Relationship Sales at Scale, same name as the presentation, basically. Just to get a little engagement out of you guys, how many of you are actively like running campaigns now? And I can't quite see the chat. Maybe Christian, you can help me out, but maybe you put up a hand or give us like a yes or a one in the chat. And let me see if I can pull up the chat. But anyway, Christian, you can just kind of summarize what people are saying, maybe.
So we have William, Stephen also running campaigns.
Cool. And with that scale of 1 to 10, 1 is like you're so frustrated that you're going to move to a cabin in Montana and become the Unabomber. 10 is that you could be on a yacht, but you're a masochist, likes to be on webinars instead. 1 to 10, how are the campaigns going?
Great. From 1 to 10, great. We have a 3.
I was actually hoping for all 10s, so then we could just like talk about other stuff, but that's cool. So anyway, that's just good to know. So I want to start out the first slide here with just kind of the state of email outreach, maybe the state of outbound. From our experience, we're not the only perspective on this, obviously. First, I want to start with the positive and start with kind of first principles here and talk about what email is, because there's so much noise, there's so much that we hear about things changing and what's going on. First, the good. Emails, is a protocol that nobody owns. I think we've seen situations where other marketing channels have gotten riskier. The risk to reward ratio of paying Silicon Valley tech companies to do advertisements or to reach your community on a LinkedIn or a Facebook, I think has gotten a little bit riskier compared to the rewards. Not to say that there is an opportunity there, but keep in mind, email is something nobody owns. It's something you can always use. You decide who you sell to. While the sales cycle is always going to be longer with outbound, you get in earlier and build trust before people have a need. So I know I'm telling you things you already know, but it's good to just kind of like, anchor this into what it is. With that, there's lots of fear right now, right? In terms of Google making changes or shutting down warmers and all this stuff. And yes, we're going to have to adjust to these things in some way. But from what we're seeing, email is still predicated on being able to contact people you don't know. Google and everyone else is still going to always have to be able to make that a thing. It doesn't matter how much AI there is. And while all of us, get annoyed by spam, there's one thing that annoys us all a lot more, which is missing out, FOMO, right? Missing out on stuff that we would want and so on. Email is also predicated on being able to send one to many, and these things aren't going to change. So I just want to use that to cool things down a little bit with all the hype we're hearing about things being shut down and warmers and all that and so on. So that's the good. With that, here are the challenges. I think that overall, email and outbound is becoming a lot more like SEO. Before we throw on the recorder, I was talking with Jeremy and Christian about this. There's a lot more division of duties that has to happen. It's harder. And it's a lot more about creating the sort of messages that people actually want to get, as opposed to just doing spray and pray and over automation. So that's a lot like other marketing channels and the work that goes into them. And the thing to do is just to go in expecting that sort of work and expecting that division of duties, as opposed to what a lot of people have been sold, which is like the one size fits all machine where you put in a token and out comes the business. I think with that, the cost of screw ups are higher. Deliverability issues, having domains shut down really creates a lot of operational drag. So it's better to get it right in the beginning. Now I want to move to kind of what is going on with agencies and B2B service companies. These are the French Knights from Monty Python, right? And it's nice. And I think that when we talk to clients that have been doing outbound for a while, or even people that are newer at this, there's 2 big reasons that outbound fails. I get a lot of emails about this. Hey, this used to work, it stopped working, and so on. The first reason is just lack of consistency. Something breaks and then you don't take the time to fix it, or a campaign doesn't work and other stuff comes up and you just don't deal with it. And later we're going to talk about systems you can build to stay more consistent and make sure that doesn't happen. The second reason, which is what's happening 99% of the time, is everybody's kind of doing a variation on the same thing, which is going in cold and trying to sell something. and it's funny because, if I were to say, when we onboard new clients, I always say, hey, before you choose to do this, you need to know that, there's almost no situation where we're going to send somebody an email and they're going to say, hey, this is great, here's $100,000. That just almost never happens. And everybody kind of nods their head and they're like, yeah, I know that. But then when we look at the copy that everyone's using, it sort of is communicating that, right? It's a lot of collateral, it's case studies, it's a million drip sequences. It's all this stuff that's creating a binary. And later I'm going to talk about how you can do something else and take a third path. But here's the reality. If you're an agency, B2B service company, there's three realities you need to understand. One, you're not special. You're perceived as a commodity. I'm not saying that you're actually not special or that you don't have differentiators, but people need to get much further into your sales cycle before they're ever going to give you enough attention to appreciate those things. So that's the first one. Second is there's tons of competition. This is for everyone, both business competition and competition for attention. And then also sales cycles are long, right? Those are the French knights laughing at everyone and us too. So with that, what's the answer, right? How do we deal with that? And I want to tell a little story and kind of the origins of our methodology, relationship sales at scale. Again, we started in 2014. In the early years, we did what everyone's doing. We did so many cold outreach campaigns. We used every channel under the sun: LinkedIn, email, phone. We sent out passenger pigeons. We held a boombox like John Cusack and Say Anything. The last two are jokes. And that kind of used to work. And then it started declining. And then I think around COVID, whenever when the digital noise increased a lot, that's when it kind of reached this boiling point, and campaigns stopped working. They didn't work as well. And we realized we had to try something else. We talked to all sorts of consultants. We lost a lot of clients in those years. And we had one client that really sticks out to me. There was this Bay Area marketing agency. They'd been around for decades. They'd worked with every big tech company under the sun. They had special systems and processes, and we tried every channel for them, and it was still crickets, right? They were probably going to let us go. So we basically came up with sort of unconventional campaign, right? We sent this sort of outreach, and what we basically did is, instead of just like going in cold and throwing more stuff at the wall, we said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do kind of a networking focused campaign. We're going to find people that used to work for one of your big clients. I don't remember what it was, but let's just say it was IBM. And we're going to find those people that used to work there that have moved on to another company that you might like to do business with. Let's say it was Symantec, or hundreds of other companies they might want to reach. If you can't read this, I'll do it out loud if I can move around some windows. But anyway, first name, I think our paths may have crossed a few years ago. Marketing/product launch work for Symantec or IBM. Curious what you have brewing in your current gig at HP. Let's catch up soon and discuss ways we might be able to work together. What's your availability like early next week? So I'm not going to make all this a pitch for us about results and a million case studies, but we got them dozens of meetings with people that almost never take meetings. Big tech companies. They went on to close several key accounts. They went on to get acquired. All this beautiful stuff happens, and this planted the seed for us in a really dramatic way. And since then, we've moved pretty much all of our campaigns to this relationship sales at scale methodology. And so on from there. And it's funny because when I show people an email like this, they're like, yeah, this is like the sort of thing that I would send to somebody after I met at a networking event. Like, this isn't like out of left field completely, but it's really just meant to harness the sort of aspect of in-person and networks and just bring it online at scale in a very deliberate way. So next, I'm going to get into a few key principles that you can use to guide this, even if you apply none of the nitty-gritty stuff, even if you never talk to us again. I think if you use these three principles and however you're doing outreach, it's gonna work really well. And then from there, I'll talk about the nitty-gritty of implementation and so on. So the first principle of this approach of relationship sales at scale is prospect where you have an unfair advantage, right? Because we all think about our ICPs, and later I'll talk about a framework for that. But it's like you have this group of accounts or that you want to reach, and everybody's just kind of doing, a variation of going in cold most of the time. And then that doesn't work. That's the worst thing you could do. The thing that's a little bit better that some people do is lots of personalization, right? And right now we see this arms race of personalization where there's people making custom videos or using AI tools or saying, hey, I saw you tweeted about this thing. That's really great. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying it never works, but what's the problem is everyone's skepticism is continuing to rise, right? And we're all sort of starting to see through that, especially skeptical prospects and larger companies and that sort of thing, right? So what we really like to think about is like, what's the thing that's timeless? What's the thing that feels scarce that's always going to work on some level? And those are like the commonalities, the strong, compelling commonalities you share with your market, right? So instead of going after your whole market, it's creating distinct campaigns that leverage those commonalities on a campaign by campaign basis, right? So I'm going to get into more examples of what those look like in a second, but that's the first principles. Instead of going in cold, prospect where you have that unfair advantage. The second principle I kind of hinted at earlier, which is basically give prospects a third path. Again, whether or not you're stating this overtly, so much outreach that we see, and if you look in your inbox, it's probably most of the outreach you're getting is putting prospects into this binary where you're either saying, hey, enter my sales process right now, or else ignore me, or worse, tell me to go away or press the spam button or whatever, which kills deliverability and stops things in their tracks and everything like that. And the issue with this is that, again, there's going to be a very small percentage of your market, and your total addressable market might not be massive anyway, that's actively in a buying mood or in a buying process. Even if they're in that process, they might not have enough trust with you to have you enter, to consider you at that point. So the third path is really build a relationship by de-risking that first call. So then you can start climbing the trust ladder. I think Joey Gilkey did a really good presentation on what that looks like earlier, but we're starting on this foundation of not a lot of trust. And really what we're trying to do is just de-risk an in-person relationship or a face-to-face relationship so that you can re-engage those people later, at which point eventually the timing is going to be right. And they're going to say, great, let's do business, or let's consider doing business together, and so on. So that's the second principle, give prospects a third path. The third one is live in the personalization scale Goldilocks zone, right? So on one hand, what we find is that the spray and pray fails because it's not compelling enough, and you're likely to get domain shut down and so on. On the other hand, over customization doesn't work for a couple of reasons. For one, sometimes the volume's so low that you're not actually getting meaningful data to make corrections and to make changes. And also it's just kind of unrealistic, especially if your team's small or you're solo. Like the idea that you're going to create, very custom love letters all the time doesn't work. And also personalization alone, like we talked about, often doesn't go far enough. So we need to be in the middle. And then you might be wondering, what does that mean, Dan? Like, what does that mean tangibly? In a second, we're going to get into that. But just to summarize a little bit, again, with cold outreach, we're going account-based. With relationship sales at scale, or RSAS, a cheesy acronym here, we're also going account-based. So we're starting by building an account-based list. That's really important. The differences with cold outreach or even slightly more personalized outreach, you're often leading with the value prop. Like, here's all the things that make us different, or here are all the things that are regurgitated about you from doing personalization research. With this, we're leading with the individual, which is like my connection to you as a prospect. With cold outreach, the work is often backloaded. So people are like, great, I'm going to go to like Zoom info, or I'm going to go buy a list, and then I'm just going to load it into the sender, and then I'm going to spend a lot of time A/B testing copy back and forth and seeing what works. I'm not saying that never works. I'm not saying there isn't a way to make that work, but what we've seen is that with big ticket sales, consultative sales, bigger markets, and so on, that ends up creating a lot more work in the long run, because then you're spending so much time diagnosing campaigns that didn't work, maybe because deliverability was bad, or maybe just because they weren't compelling. So the difference is, with relationship sales at scale, we're going to front load the work and focus more on first building the account list, and then identifying the prospects that are within those circles of influence that you have and share a commonality, right? So that's the second aspect. The fourth thing here, rather, is that with cold outreach, the message looks generic. With relationship sales at scale, we're creating a just for me effect, basically, with this. And that's the goal with it, by building distinct campaigns. So from here, I want to summarize what that process looks like so that you can implement it, or rather what it looks like for our clients. This might look slightly different for you, depending on your situation. The first is you're coming up with that ICP. Some of you might be listening. You're like, great, I know that, Dan. I know our ICP like the back of our hand. If this is a hard task for you, it probably means it's something you really need to do, right? Or you're identifying your ideal client or customer profile. There's not one way to do this. This is part art, part science. Everybody's different, but I think this is the framework that we did not invent this. I've heard it phrased like this, but it works really well. So in order of importance, if you're building out that ICP, first is kind of like, where are you most poised to help, right? Like, where do you have the happiest clients? Where do you have the best track record, and so on? So that's the foundation. That's the most important thing. The second is, what is findable online, especially like with the sort of methodology we're using in this particular situation. For example, if you're selling if you're considering blue collar tiny factories in the Midwest, that's probably going to be harder to find than like an established brand with a marketing department, for example. So again, there's exceptions here, but that's the second consideration. The third is all things being equal, if the above two boxes are checked, what's a growing market, right? What's expanding? Better to work with tech companies than newspapers, maybe. So something to think about. The second is you're building that account list. And as you're building that account list, like the first point, I think a good framework is you want there to be at least 1,000 accounts per ICP. There could be exceptions to that, but you want at least that, because really the customization and the slicing and dicing is going to come more in the next step when we get to the prospect level. And you're identifying those prospects that share particular commonalities. I'm going to get into specific examples of what those commonalities can be. So you want there to be enough of a market there so that you can make things compelling. So often that means the copy is not always super vertical specific. It can be, and there's reasons that might be effective. Like if you only sell to a particular vertical, great. But really the thing that's going to de-risk the call is, the commonality you share and what you're doing in general, right? Overall. So you're finding prospects that share, just one, but it could be up to two of those commonalities. And I think a good metric to aim for, there could be other opinions on this, is like 300 to 500 contacted per week. Now, if you're selling to small dentist office, in the US, that the volume might go up by thousands, right? But for us, our experience is grounded in B2B consultative sales, big ticket. And if you have 300 to 500 per week, that becomes a list that you can manage, and that you can actually build that foreseeably by putting, an hour or two of work per week, or less, especially if you're getting help from VAs and so on. And also, let's say that you're getting, conservatively speaking, a 1 or 2% meeting rate, which is like, maybe you're not getting that at first, but that's a good amount of a good rate to aim for. That means you're getting basically a meeting per business day. And that means if you're at a 10% close rate, which is a pretty standard like industry average for outbounds, you're closing like a deal every 2 weeks, which can move mountains, right? For big ticket offers. So that's a way to think about this. It's nice to have some kind of numbers, even if you change them. From there, you're launching campaigns in your preferred sending platform. Now, people always ask, what do you do about follow-ups? How many touch points? I hear you need 20 touch points, Dan, to win a piece of business. Yes, but the difference is a lot of those touch points are going to happen through re-engagement after you've already had a face-to-face interaction with somebody on a call or in a meeting or whatever. The fact is 80% of the persuasion that we're doing is going to come from the very first email. Yes, we might do a light touch or two a week or two later, like, hey, wanted to check back, make sure you got this, thought I'd run this thing by you. But most of the heavy lifting is done at the beginning. And the reason for that is there's sort of a risk and reward problem. Like as somebody is getting more and more messages, that's when they're going to be more likely, if they're not into it, to press spam. But the good news is, as you'll see with the copy in a second, even if people aren't ready to talk, it's very rare that people are mad at this kind of outreach because of the strength of the commonality and the human connection there and so on. So that's the overall process. I want to talk a little bit about implementation and what this would look like.
Sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
just a second, Dan. Just wanted to mention, if you guys have questions based on Dan's presentation, please put them in the chat and I'll write them down and we'll ask him at the end.
Cool.
That's it. Yeah, you can go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so in terms of implementation here, we're starting with building the account list. I think account-based selling is really important for this in terms of making sure that you're getting a meeting worth having. Again, there are exceptions, but for bigger ticket offers, I think this is important. And in terms of how to think about where you're getting that data, it can come from a lot of different wells depending on your industry and so on. ZooInfo, if you're already signed up for that, Winmo, if you're in the agency space, even if you don't want to sign up for an expensive data platform, you really don't need to. Sales Navigator is the key tool that's going to make this happen, and you can use that to identify the sorts of accounts that you'd want to reach. Helium's one for the Amazon space that's pretty good, Helium 10 rather, and there's many more from there. And you can always, like LinkedIn, is a one-way street. They want your data, but they're not going to give it to you. So you can, but basically, once you have that account list, you're bringing it into Sales Navigator and going from there. Sales Navigator is kind of like the mind map or the web that's going to let you identify, okay, who in these accounts shares a particular commonality. commonality, right? And that's where you can build distinct campaigns and set them up in a tool like Quick Mail a little bit later. So in a second, on the next slide, I'm going to get into actual campaigns we've run and the specific copy we've used. But to preview that a little bit, here's a few of the commonalities we've used very successfully in the past. Some of these might sound basic, and then we've done ones that are really out there and very sophisticated and so on. But even if they sound basic to you, keep an open mind, because the devil's in the details and they can work really well. So the first one is relevant location, right? And this could be where you're physically based, or you can really broad frame this, right? Maybe it's where you're going to a conference in 3 months. Maybe it's where your partner or colleague is based. Maybe it's where you grew up. Maybe it's where you went to college. And once you start thinking about all these things that you have in common, this really expands the sorts of campaigns that you can build, right? And later I'll get into an example of that we've done with an expat connection, where you can use a whole country. Hey, Jeremy's in Switzerland right now. Maybe you're from Switzerland, Jeremy, or maybe you're from France. I'm not sure, but you could reference that, for example, and find everybody has a French connection, like the movie, in the US, and sell to them. Another is relevant person, right? So let's say the connections that you have, but also the connections your team has. You can see everybody that knows your business partner, or that knows some key person that's your best friends in a particular industry. Referencing an actual name of somebody makes it really hard for somebody to ignore, right? And it brings up the meeting rate and everything like that. Relevant company, like I talked about earlier. Again, this could be one of your key clients, or maybe it's a company you used to work at. One of the most successful campaigns we've run internally is for a salesperson of ours that used to work at Living Social. And we sent an email that was like, hey, I saw you worked at Living Social. I saw you're working here now. That was a really hard job. Like, I still remember the lunchroom, but the food was amazing there. And like, that got so many meetings, we had to turn it off to let them catch up, so that's kind of the approach we're thinking of. Again, thinking of 300 to 500 contacted per week, and running, one to a few campaigns at once. And then from there, doing, 1 or 2 touch points. Again, the first email is going to do the heavy lifting. So I want to get into some copy and some case studies here, so to kind of show you how you can run this. So when you look at this, you're like, oh my God, this is a massive email. It does not look pretty at all, but it worked really well. And ultimately, this is where, art and science meets. There's not one way to do this. You can make this fit your voice, of course. But this was a client of ours that was selling for an agency. They're actually kind of a boutique agency of record. Their average deal size, probably like at least $200,000. They're selling into pharmaceuticals, as well as healthcare focused over-the-counter or OTC brands, kind of anything you'd find in a CVS here in the States. So for them, what we did is we said, okay, we build this list of accounts. Now our client's from Australia. So we're going to find everyone who's an Australian expat or has a common connection to Australia. So maybe that's a bunch of universities that are based there. Maybe it's something else, companies that are based there, through a lot of data mining. So I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read the kind of key, lead into this. And we're saying, hey, Philip, just in case you can't see it, I want to drop you a quick note. I noticed we have a common connection to Australia. I wanted to reach out and connect. I grew up in Adelaide, South Australia, but have lived in the US for the past 20 years now. Actually, I've lived here for so long, my family told me I completely lost my accent, LOL, but I do still have many family and friends over there and still visit often. Anyway, for a little background, I'm president and CEO of this agency. Last year, we launched this product, a full service marketing agency that exclusively works with healthcare related companies. We are lucky enough to count these areas as part of our client roster. I'll paraphrase the rest, but ultimately, I'm looking to network and do business. Would you be open to connecting? And with this, it was, resounding success, 126 prospects in 4 months. We got him a meeting with the CMO of Unilever, Bristol Myers Squibb, CVS Pharmacy, people that never take meetings. And, on one hand, it's like, oh my God, what's so special about this? But on the other hand, it's like, okay, it kind of makes sense. These people are now almost never receiving this kind of outreach. So it looks like it's just for them and is based on a commonality. So this sort of email is very hard to ignore. But even for the campaigns, sorry, Christian. Yeah.
Quick question about the copy. Did you purposely not put space between the sentences? Kind of have it like a big block, so it looks, I don't know, like it looks more natural?
Good question. We did in this case for whatever reason, just to test it out, but we do space it out more with other copy, which I'll get into. So it's been a little while, so I can't tell you the exact reason we did that, to be honest. But I think that, if you think about the psychology of the person reading this, they're seeing the preview. Like if I go here, they're seeing this. And that's going to really do a lot of the heavy lifting. Like this is going to get their attention that, it might be better to space it out a little bit from there, but this is already like getting this, it's already kind of hitting the 80-20, I think. I'm just speculating though, but good question. So with that, this works really well, kind of, again, using a commonality, using human connection. I'll get to another example here. This is a client of ours that was selling web design services, web design development, one of the hardest things to sell because it's so commoditized. And we used an alumni connection, right? So I know that I'm getting emails like this. I know sometimes I bring this up with people. They're like, yeah, I've seen this before. It's a little cheesy, but the devil's in the details. And especially if you've gone to a larger college or university, this can work really well. And it's really just about the copy and kind of like building that personal connection. And that's really what we've seen work, right? Where we're saying, Ivan, I saw like me, you're an alumnus of UCLA. I received my undergraduate degree in psychology there back in 2001. I hope you're staying healthy, safe, and sane during these crazy times. I wanted to reach out and network with you. This was done during COVID, hence that. So I wanted to reach out to network with you if you're open to it. I'm located in Seal Beach with an office in Santa Monica. I'm currently a partner with this agency. We focus on creative and digital. We've been around for 10 years. We work with clients like these. Would you be open to connecting? So this worked really well. We got him so many meetings, we had to turn it off, 125 prospects in a month and a half. And this was for, again, 6-figure design and dev projects. Again, just kind of building that personal connection and going from there, because that's really the thing that's going to de-risk a call in a relationship. And I talk about this a lot in the book. I won't go really into philosophy. You can check it out in the book. When we get to the end, I'll give you access to that. But I think, just real quick, I think the main scarce resource now is not product differentiation. I think that matters later, but I think at the top of the funnel, again, it's really trust. It's about kind of going up that trust ladder. And that's really what we're trying to do with this copy. But again, we can't just do 5 of these a day. We have to find commonalities that are going to give us that scale to send approximately a few hundred per week, right? So that's the idea. I'll get to one more example. This is the most profitable thing we do by far. The catch is it does take more time and more work for our clients, but it works really well. And it's basically a targeted or a batched referral campaign. So for years, we talked to new clients. We say, where do you get your business? They would say, oh, referrals. And we'd yell and say, that's not enough, and they're like, yeah, we know it doesn't scale and all this and blah, blah, blah. But let's admit the obvious. Referrals are still the best lead you can get. You're going to have more trust with a referral than anything else. The problem is everybody's just kind of reactively stumbling into them as opposed to being very deliberate and targeted and, relatively scaled about how they get them. So this is how we do referral campaigns, right? And the first thing we're doing is we're building that account list. So again, we know what accounts we want to reach for our clients. Step 2 for our clients, we're going to them. We're saying, okay, this is our client, Greg, at an event marketing agency. They do 6- and 7-figure events for large tech and other B2B companies. So Greg's been at this for a while, pretty big network. We say, Greg, export your list of first-degree LinkedIn connections. Here's how to do it. You just go into the settings, you export that. First, take out anyone you don't know, like all the fake connections we all have, just get those out of there. And you can take out anybody else you'd rather not talk to, like you'd rather not reconnect with, like maybe you're taking out your best friend and your current clients and that kind of thing. Step 3 is we send all of those pre-approved connections a message like this one. We're saying, hey, Brian, hope you've been well since we last connected. I want to drop you a quick note. I'm working on some new initiatives here at my company. Wanted to ask for your help and get your advice on a few things. Would you be open to catching up? In a newer version of this, we're actually making it more deliberate and honest. And we're saying, hey, I saw you might know a couple of people I'd like to connect with. From there, what we see is probably around half of the people that we reach out to are like, hey, yeah, sounds good, Greg, let's talk. And then they talk. 5 or 10 minutes before the call, Greg's going into Sales Navigator and we're helping him map everybody those people know to the accounts he wants to reach. So then Greg's able to go in and see, okay, Brian knows the CMO of HP and the VP of marketing at Symantec and, these other roles that I want to reach, right? So then he can get on that call and catch up, talk, offer to help, and so on. And then at the end, he can say, hey, by the way, like I saw these 3 people. Would you be open to helping me out? Would you be open to making an intro? Now, that can go different ways. Maybe they don't actually know that person, or maybe they say, hey, I don't know them well enough, or I just don't feel comfortable making an intro. And then maybe Greg says, no worries. Do you mind if I reach out to them and just mention that we talked? That as a backup, that's one thing you could do. But even if nothing comes of it, it's still going to have a much, much higher hit rate than the way most people are normally handling referrals, right? Which is that awkward call where you're like, hey, do you know anyone? And guess what happens when you say, do you know anyone? that now creates this like massive question mark for that other person, where they're like, first I have to find an opportunity for you. I have to understand what you do. The stars have to align for me to help you. It creates a lot of work and so on, versus like, hey, can you help me in this very specific way? And I'm going to make it very easy for you to help me. And even following up and including a template to use to make the intro means that you're getting referred in a batched way into accounts that you want to reach at relative scale. So that's kind of, it does take more time, because you got to talk to your network, but it works better than anything that we do. And this is one of our more common campaigns that works well. So wanted to shed some light on that. Hopefully that's useful. For the last lesson that I want to go over here, earlier, we talked about one of the two reasons outbound falls apart. And it's really just consistency, right? Like you start doing something, hey, the domain gets blown up, this widget breaks, there's some issue with the data, a list builder doesn't get back to you on time. The thing to do is just plan for this and know it's going to happen and budget time for fixing it. So scheduling is deeply personal. I'm not saying you have to do it this exact way, but what we do with our team and what we encourage in our training programs for clients and stuff is budget like an hour or two a week for new campaign management, i.e. copywriting, thinking of like how you're going to get the data, testing viability, maybe you're delegating stuff to list builders and so on. I know Jeremy and Christian talk about this a lot in terms of division of duties and like the idea of outbound being a team process. I think that's really important. Even if you're just solo, even if you don't have the resources to build a team, you're at least dividing up your thinking and yourself as if it's a team, right? And so on. I think that's really important. And then really, to be honest, where the money is made with outbound, especially for big ticket, is with re-engagement, right? Again, nobody's going to get an email and give you $100,000 or whatever it is. And I think the problem is people overthink re-engagement and they go down these technical rabbit holes of like HubSpot and Zapier and automations and all these things. And I'm not saying there isn't a time or a place. Absolutely put people into your newsletter that you're talking to. That's all great. But really re-engagement can just be as simple as like a filter in your CRM that says, hey, here's everyone that I haven't talked to in 30 days. Let me look at them at least. And then say, can I follow up with them? Right. And that follow-up, what we've seen work and what we've done internally here at Sales Schema since 2014, this was probably like 80% of the business we win is like, meetings we have from outbound and then re-engaging people later and saying something to the effect of, hey, we talked 30, 60, 90 days ago, was curious what decisions you guys have made on the new business front. By the way, we're up to these new things. We have this new project we're working on. We have these new results. Would you be open to connecting in the next couple of weeks? And from there, what's going on is we're getting a much higher meeting rate. It's pretty common for us to get like a 5 or 10% meeting rate on that. But then the other like 80, 90% of people, are not mad at that outreach because we have a one-to-one relationship and we're not, overselling people. And then usually the people that do want to talk are saying things like, hey, timing's great. We've actually been talking about this, or they'll take the call and say, hey, here's what's changed. This is actually more relevant now. And then now you have a real opportunity on your hands. So that's really where the wins come from. Same with our better clients that are doing this well and so on from there. So with that, hopefully this has been useful to you guys. I can talk a little bit about what we're up to, and if you want to take this further, and Christian, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Dan. So let's go into Q&A. We actually have only one question on outbound, which is a bit of a shame because we want to pick your brain on that more. So if anyone has questions about what Dan just presented, shoot it in the chat, and there's high chances we'll get it answered. Jeremy, do you have any? I saw you write some notes down. Do you have any questions?
No, just go ahead, Christian.
All right. So Yushant is asking, how is the approach different when going after high ticket versus small ticket clients in terms of outbound?
Yeah, really good question. And I'm going to assume that there's no questions because I've answered everything that could possibly be asked under the sun, and everybody's a genius at this now.
Yeah.
Or it's just not covering enough. But that's a great question. So I think with smaller ticket, it's more about scale, right, than anything else, and more about volume. compared to areas where there's a limited total addressable market. So, and just to be honest and upfront, our main experience is big ticket, but the people that I know and the clients that we've observed doing smaller ticket really well are thinking more about like dedicated IPs to help with deliverability, lots more volume, thinking about the data and that kind of thing, and then just keeping this going at all times. So I think it's a different approach. I think that if you want to get fancier with that might include personalization, but it's a little bit different. So hopefully that's helpful, and I'm happy to dig further into that if there's more questions on it.
Cool, thanks. So Ben, yes, we we discussed personalization in depth. Do you call this? Do you have a different? Do you call personalization? Is personalization different in your mind from what you just presented, Dan?
Yeah, good question. So personalization is kind of like a catch-all, right? That can mean anything. I've heard people refer to personalization of just using somebody's first name, right, in marketing or sales. So I like to define it a little bit more. So to answer the question, the way that we define this is, to get fancy or use our branded term, relationship sales at scale. But if you don't want to use our word, that's kind of a mouthful. I think commonality-based or outreach is the way to think about this. So instead of personalization, because personalization is kind of just one way, right? If I'm reaching out to you, Christian, I could find out all this stuff about you and say, hey, here's all the stuff I found about you. You're in Romania, you work for QuickMail, whatever. And you're like, great, that's nice, but that's not really that compelling. Commonality is I think compelling because it's scarce by definition, which is something that two people share in common, right? So the trick is finding commonalities that give you enough scale and are also compelling enough. And that's really what we're focused on. And even if you never hire us, I think that's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
Good thing. I'm glad I asked. William asks, has Dan seen that it's a best practice to include the personalization the commonality based info very early in the email or the first thing in the email?
Good question. So the short answer is yeah, absolutely. We always lead with it because that's the thing. It's just like any other, marketing copy. You have to get somebody's attention so they can read further. It's kind of like one sentence sells the next sentence, sells the next sentence sort of thing. So we're typically putting it in the subject line. In fact, if you want, I can go back to some of this copy. We're saying, hi, Philip, Australia connection for this particular subject line. Even if you went in cold and you decided to scrap all this, one of the best subject lines we've run is just like first name and, Bob and Dan intro or something like that. What we found is that, we don't want this to look like marketing copy. It's a different vibe completely. We want it to seem very, very human and to kind of feel like the sort of email you'd send to somebody you'd actually met, maybe at a networking event or something like that. I think I'm very permissive in my inbox with people doing cold email because it's kind of like we're in the same world. But the one reason that I'll add people to spam is if they make my cortisol go up, if they make me stressed, if they say like, I'm giving up, we've all seen these dramatic subject lines where it's like, you're going to fail, or like, or something like that. So stay far away from that. You want this to look like, hey, I'm in your world and you're in mine, and we should probably talk. That's kind of the vibe.
Oh, that's interesting, Dan. Is that the only people you've set to spam? Like for me, there's one type of people I would always flag as spam is the people using generic email addresses on a website that should not be used for outreach. An example will be abuse@quickmail.io, which is funny because then we're receiving, cold outreach on abuse at QuickMail, or things like privacy at QuickMail, all those sort of like emails flagged automatically as spam. I don't understand why people will send a cold outreach to privacy at quickmail.io, for example.
Oh no, I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying, me personally, I'm like a softie. I won't personally like manually put people in spam because I'm just like, you're doing your best. But no, there's
not
nothing wrong with it.
Using those things like privacy at quickmail.io, I don't think that's doing your best. That's the only one I actually flag as spam, because they do it on support at quickmail.io. Like, support people have other things to do already. So that's not a good thing. And plus it's sloppy and lazy. So
exactly. Yeah. And if I'm feeling generous, I'll like actually get back to people on that sort of thing, but that's pretty rare. Yeah. Usually not enough time for that. So good questions.
I got a question for you, Dan. You know, obviously about Cialdini and the weapon of influence, right? Or the influence factors, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like your copy is heavily geared toward liking, which I like, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. Do you also rely on other factors like reciprocity and authority and other stuff like that?
Yeah, great question. It's been a little, I read that book maybe like 5 years ago, so I got to catch up on it. To answer the question, I think a little bit. I think oftentimes when we're doing this networking sort of thing like this, we're sort of saying, "Hey, I can open up my network to you." But the way that, and this is speculation, and you know, I'm kind of I don't have firm data on it, but my hunch is that the reason a lot of this works is that there's kind of a social cost to it, where it's what it's subcommunicating is like, this is probably somebody in my world. I may cross paths with them again. And then in terms of reciprocity, I think the other trigger that's getting flipped is like, they took the time to do their research on me and find me and so on. Right. So I think those three combined, create up the effectiveness for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We have a question from Mihailo. He wants to ask it via microphone, so I'm just gonna mute him.
Thanks a lot, first of all, for the webinar. Very insightful. So my question is, you said regarding follow-ups that if we send too many follow-ups, people will regard us as spam because it's like, I didn't answer to your first 3 emails. Why do you think I'll answer on the 4th? But well, I use this Fibonacci sequence because things change with the prospect. So I follow up after 3, 5, 8, and then 30, 60 business days. So I don't know. Do you have some? Did you have some bad experiences where you follow up 8 times and then you destroy the inboxes, or?
Yeah, great question. And I didn't get really far into follow-ups, and maybe I should have, but just for the sake of kind of like time and everything. And I think the way we like to think about it is less is more at the beginning. You know, I think once you've tried a couple times and spaced those out by a week or so, then after that, it's kind of diminishing returns. But we will do re-engagement campaigns with people where we might have a filter that says, you know, identify everybody that hasn't been contacted and, you know, at least in 30 plus days that hasn't replied. And then we might wake them back up again. We've had that work pretty well. I just think that if you're doing it in a short-term way, there's kind of a risk and reward problem where it's like, yeah, you'll scrape up a couple more meetings, but then there's going to be a lot more people that are going to be likely to press that spam button, and you're kind of increasing the likelihood that you're going to get a domain shut down. And then that's going to like, sometimes that can, depending on how well you're set up, that might create like a week or two of no campaigns at all, which is worse. So it's just kind of a thing you have to juggle. But I should define things a little bit better. I think there's 2 types of re-engagement. There's re-engagement with people that you haven't talked to before, and then there's re-engagement with people you have talked to before. I think where the most effectiveness comes from and the most leverage is focusing on re-engaging the people you have talked to before, right? Which if you're starting new, that snowball effect might not be in order, but after a few months of doing outreach and getting a number of meetings, that's really where the wins are going to come from. So that's kind of so it's sort of like, yes, the follow-ups can work, but it's like a matter of emphasis, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. So I understand. Okay, that's also something that I've never done. Like I always wait at least 5 days to pass after the first follow-up because people are busy that I don't know. But I find it, what I said, I find it just convenient that when you follow up with added value after 10 days and 15 days and a month and then 3 months, I mean, you could have kids subscribe in the header, and I want to talk with you. So I think it's not an issue.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I'm not saying don't follow up at all, but I think you're doing it probably the right way, which is spacing it out in the same way you would if you were doing this manually. Like if you were going to reach back out to somebody, you wouldn't reach out 2 days later. You'd probably reach out like a week later, right? In terms of the copy, I think there's different ways to make it work. What we've seen work personally is, again, this is just our approach, but like less salesy, again, because we want to keep people out of that binary. So usually our follow-ups will say something like, wanted to see if this got to you. Hey, guessing you're busy, checking back one more time. Because the fact is we're keeping it all in the same thread, like all the original firepower of what we're doing and the description of the offering, they can see that in the same thread if they want to. So it's really just kind of like checking back in case they were busy or they didn't see it or whatever. That's the way that we think about it. Yeah. And as a side note, Jeremy, back to our previous conversation, one thing I will always add to spam as well is if somebody makes a follow-up without the original thread, because then they're saying like, hey, you're expected to go back and find my first email.
Yeah, I love
which
those
is
guys.
which is crazy. Yeah. So that's always interesting. Yep.
Yeah, for follow-ups, usually what I do is for the sort of last email in a follow-up, I just basically say like, hey, I'll circle back in 3 months, or I just basically give the heads up that I may reach out in the future. So I may phrase it something similar like that. So it's just like a contract again. And when you do it, then it's just the trust is going up because, yeah, this guy actually did say that he will come back, and then he actually did come back. And the other approach that I've seen as well, sort of working, is like simply like someone else, like, hey, hey, I'm Jeremy. I'm picking up on Dane's, where Dane was, and just wanted to know if that conversation moved along or some stuff like that, and sort of like re-enable that from a different angle.
Yeah, I like that because it's basically saying I'm going to do this, and it builds the trust and it builds that sort of like level of familiarity. So that's good.
All right, last question from Stephen. He basically is asking in a long form, what is the best format or structure an email should have, or do you have a preferred email structure?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is one of those kind of like part art, part science things. So I've seen every sort of email work or not work at this point. I've seen long emails work and not work. I've seen short emails work and not work. So there's not one way. But I think there's a few things going on, and that we want to get right. The first is like leading with that commonality and that personalization. Oftentimes, although we broke this rule, like with this email, yes, I think all things being equal, shorter kind of airier paragraphs work well. Talking about, why you're reaching out. I wanted to reach out because, like, for some reason that helps out a lot. But and a lot of this is stylistic again, so kind of teach their own. But a lot of our emails, I think, look a little bit more formal, like a little bit more older school. We're talking about proof, but we're not doing the marketing copy thing where we're like, hey, we get our clients 100% million revenue, whatever, in this amount of time. We're sort of doing that subtly by saying, like, we've been at this 10 years. We work with clients like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and eBay. We're not beating people over the head with it, but we're talking about it. What's going to be intriguing about this call? This doesn't have to be through client name drops, especially if you don't have that, but it could be something tangible that you're doing that's interesting, that's not super braggadocious, because you have to think about like what these things are communicating or sub-communicating. If there's too much sort of like copy, like you'd find in a case study, what that sub-communicating is, I'm going to get sold on this call. So if I'm not looking for this, I'm not going to do it. So that's important. And then oftentimes we're tying back to that original commonality at the very end, including something personal, UCLA ties, go Bruins, thanks, and so on. So what we're looking at is like for nobody to really be mad at this message. So hopefully that answers the question, but that's kind of how we're thinking about structuring the email, and a few like kind of beats we're looking to hit there.
Can I bounce back on something then?
Sorry, was that? Can
I bounce back on one point?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's something I don't hear very often, but that's always like an advice I always give people is, instead of actually bragging or like saying like, I'm really good at X, just actually use a reverse engineering, saying something that when people will read it, they will think, oh, he's really good at X. So an example would be like, hey, we've been working with such and such. And if those people are good, again, that's a name dropping, that could be something else. But the point is like, if you read this, you say, oh, that person must be really on top or something like that. And you can apply that to a lot of things by just using reverse engineering, basically.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think
people trust more their judgment than you telling them what they should, judge, basically.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly what we're going for. And I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. But one is like, if you have been around a long time, like that's one of those things that longevity communicates a lot, so that's worth mentioning for sure. Yeah.
Okay, the last question, let's make it answer it quickly because it was insisted upon. Do you ever add on another channel like LinkedIn messaging to these outreach campaigns?
Yeah, good question. So the short answer is yes, we will do connections on LinkedIn, especially for our internal outreach and sometimes for clients as a follow-up, or once we see people opening or something to that effect. To be honest, like email is really the domain we do best. So I'm not saying like LinkedIn doesn't work or anything like that. I'm just saying like email is what we like because we find that it gets us more meetings directly, because that's where people go to do business and it's trackable and so on. And LinkedIn's making things harder. And also because we're doing this for clients, there's certain like account risks and that kind of thing. But to answer your question, I think you can absolutely incorporate LinkedIn, but I think it sort of adds to the level of personalization. It's kind of an add-on to email. So you want to think about email doing the heavy lifting. So, in quick mail, perhaps you can set up touch points and others and use a simple connection. I think, and I'm not saying this never works. I hate it when people say like, this is dead, this doesn't work. There's people killing it on LinkedIn, and definitely encourage you to check out what they're up to. But I think that what we found is that the sort of like automated messaging and that kind of thing on LinkedIn is hard to make work because there's so much noise. Everybody knows it's automated. And also people go to LinkedIn to like read content. So making the conversion happen is harder. But I think if you're going to incorporate LinkedIn, like the way to use it is like a simple connection that says, "Hey, I sent you an email, thought I'd connect," either before or after you've done that email. Yeah.
Love it.
Sweet. All right. Dan, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, for sure. Let me zoom ahead a little bit. So this is the stuff we're up to. If you wanted to take this further, we have a training program that runs about a year. It's like an on-demand course, group Q&A, Slack community. So that's saleschema.com/training. You can learn more and apply to that there and see if it's a fit. And then if you're interested in our done-for-you outreach, that's usually a fit for agencies and B2B service companies at about 10 employees or more, and your client lifetime value should be above 50K. And there's more info about that on our site if you want to take it further. Even if none of the above is a fit right now, I want to leave you guys with something. So because you've made it this far, I want to give everybody a free copy of the book behind me. This goes into the methodology, it goes into everything. There's nothing held back in this, relationship sales at scale. And you can get a PDF of that at just saleschema.com/quickmail.